Baal's Return, The Search for the Lost Truth. This audiobook is based on the true experiences of Bert Spuhn, an extraordinary person whose travels and insights take us into a world full of mysteries and discoveries. I never thought my life would be tied to a deity like Baal, and yet here I am, caught between reality and something beyond our imagination. It began with a curiosity that was deeply rooted in me, a flame that had burned since childhood. Even as a child, I could never simply accept what I was told. Why, I wondered, did the stars have such an influence on people? What was hidden behind the stories in old books? And why did no one have definitive answers? I picked up the Bible for the first time when I was 7 years old. While other children were outside playing hide-and-seek or riding their bikes, I immersed myself in these texts that were thousands of years old. The language, the mystery, the contradictions, all of this attracted me like a magnet. I read them not just once, but over and over again, page after page, year after year. To this day, I have read them through at least twice in their entirety, from the Old Testament to the New. But instead of finding answers, it raised even more questions. One scene in particular remains in my memory. It was a gray autumn day and I was sitting alone in my room while rain was pounding against the window outside. I held the Bible in my hand and stared at the words. In the beginning was the Word. What did that mean? Was the Word a symbol, an energy, an entity? My heart was pounding. There had to be more, I thought. More than was written in these pages. These burning questions never left me alone. They drew me out into the world, further and further. It was not enough to read books or hear stories. I wanted to see these places for myself, to feel them, to understand them. My first decisive step took me to Mexico, to Teotihuacan. A coincidence, it seemed, or perhaps an intuition that guided me. The first sight of the sun and moon pyramids was overwhelming. The air was warm and dry. A light wind swirled up the fine golden dust of the earth, which lay like a veil over the landscape. The mighty pyramids rose from the plain like gigantic witnesses of a long-forgotten time. The streets were lined with charred cacti and low thorn bushes, whose shadows painted long lines on the ground in the light of the afternoon sun. As I walked down the street of the dead, I felt the silence. Not the kind of silence that is uncomfortable or empty, but a silence that carried something promising. Every step seemed to be absorbed by the earth and carried on somewhere. It was as if the earth itself was listening. In the evening I returned to my small accommodation, but I could not sleep. It was as if the pyramids were calling me. Their sight had burned itself into my mind. So I made a daring decision. I would return, alone, without tourists, without noise. I waited until night fell and had myself locked in the grounds after 8 p.m. Darkness fell like a black cloak over the landscape. The moon, almost full, was high in the sky, bathing the pyramids in a silvery light. The air was cool and I could hear the whisper of the wind blowing through the grasses and cracks in the ancient stones. As I climbed the steep steps of the Pyramid of the Moon, I felt a mixture of awe and anticipation. Halfway up, I sat down and let my gaze wander down the Avenue of the Dead. It seemed endless in the moonlight, like a silvery stream leading to infinity. The silence was tangible, like a living thing enveloping me. My breathing was calm, but my heart was pounding fast. Then suddenly, the silence was broken by a sound. It was a rattle, soft at first, then louder. I turned around and saw a snake emerge from a pile of rocks. The rattlesnake was not like any other. It was huge, a good 10 feet long, its scales shimmering in the moonlight like polished metal. Its eyes sparkled like black pearls. My heart skipped a beat, and yet, I was not afraid. It reared up in front of me, its rattle falling to the ground and echoing like a bell sending out an ancient call. Slowly it snaked around my arm and disappeared back into the pile of rocks. I sat motionless for a long time, the wind blowing softly through the night. Something had happened, but what? Was it a sign? Or just a coincidence? Mexico was just the beginning. My journey continued into Peru, to the mystical ruins of Machu Picchu. Arriving in the mountains was like stepping into another world. The air was cool and clear, with a hint of earth and wet grass. All around the fortress, the rugged emerald-green mountains rose like the backs of sleeping dragons, and over everything floated thick bands of clouds that sometimes opened to let the sun through. The sounds of nature were ever present. The distant cry of an eagle, the soft murmur of a waterfall flowing in a hidden valley. Late in the evening I wandered alone through the ancient fortress. The walls of large, irregular stones exuded something timeless, as if they were not made by human hands, but by nature itself. It was as if the stones breathed. Suddenly I noticed two figures, Indians standing at the entrance to a temple. Their faces were hidden by the shadows of night, but their posture was alert. They looked at me, and I felt as if I was being watched, not only by them, but by the entire landscape. Attracted by a rock that towered over the city like a sentinel, I slowly walked towards it. My heart beat faster as I placed my hand on the top of the stone. The contact was cold, but reassuring. At that moment, a loud rumble of thunder broke the silence of the night. It was not a storm, not a landslide. It was a sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth. The Indians who had been watching me earlier bowed deeply and began to murmur quietly in a language I did not understand. Later at the hotel, archaeologists told me about the legend of the talking stone. If the stone made a sound, the Indians believed it was a sign from the gods. Such experiences took me from one place to the next, from the majestic pyramids of Teotihuacan to the floating mists of Machu Picchu, to the temple complexes of Olympia in Greece, the heights of Popocatépetl, Mount Moses in the Sinai Peninsula, and many other mystical sites. In each place, nature seemed to be a silent companion, the backdrop that added to the mystery. This journey was more than a search for knowledge. It was a search for a truth that was older than any civilization, a truth that lay deep in the roots of the earth. And deep within me, I knew. This was just the beginning. My last trip took me to Egypt, to the heart of a world that has held mysteries for millennia. It was the call of the Great Pyramid of Giza that drew me, an inner urge that I could not resist. The flight from Frankfurt to Cairo was unlike any before. As we floated above the clouds, I struck up a conversation with the pilot, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a calm, almost stoic air. It began with a casual comment about the weather, but soon he was telling me about the inexplicable things he had experienced during his flights. Unidentified flying objects, he said, not of this world. His voice was quiet, almost reverent, as if he was speaking not just of airplanes but of mysteries he could not understand. Curious, I asked if it was possible to fly over the Giza plateau. Normally this was forbidden, but to my surprise he nodded. "I see that you are attracted to this place," he said. "We'll make an exception." I was allowed to enjoy the view from the pilot's cabin, and what I saw took my breath away. The pyramids of Giza, framed by the golden sands of the desert, appeared below us like islands in a sea of dust and time. The glowing horizon of the desert merged with the clear blue of the sky, and I felt like a witness to something eternal. My heart was pounding and I couldn't look away. It was as if the pyramids themselves were calling to me, a silent but irresistible tug in my chest. Before I reached Giza, My path took me to Mount Sinai. The climb was arduous, but the view from the top was worth it. Millions of stars stretched above me like a sparkling blanket of light, and below me stretched the barren, rugged valleys of the desert. The wind was cool and carried the smell of dry sand and ancient stones. I spent days in the desert alone with my thoughts. The silence there was absolute. No sounds, no distractions, just the soft crunch of the sand beneath my feet and the whisper of the wind moving through the ravines. As I meditated, the world around me became quiet, and in that silence I began to feel something. A presence, a connection to something I could not name. At night, the desert was magical. The sand shimmered silver in the moonlight, and the shadows of the dunes danced like ghosts. It was a silence that was not empty, but full of meaning. Here I felt small, but at the same time part of something immense. When I finally stood in front of the Great Pyramid of Giza, I was overwhelmed. The structure rose like a silent sentinel of eternity, each stone slab a testament to a time far beyond my comprehension. The pyramid was more than just a structure. It was a being, a monument that seemed to have a soul of its own. The sand beneath my feet was hot and the air shimmered in the midday sun. The pyramid loomed before me, vast and yet strangely inviting. The sight filled me with awe, and yet I felt a strange urge, an inner need to reach the top. I placed my hand on one of the stones, and for a moment I thought I felt something. A slight vibration, a pulse, as if the stone were breathing. The warmth of the sun and the cool roughness of the rock combined in a strange balance. The way up would be long, I knew that. But something inside me, a part deep in my soul, urged me to climb. The pyramid was calling, and I was ready to answer. The adventure had only just begun. I had no idea what would await me at the top, but the pyramid had something in store for me, something that would change my life forever. The tour of the interior of the pyramid was an experience I will never forget. As soon as I entered the Great Pyramid, I was enveloped in an atmosphere of ancient power, as if the walls themselves were whispering stories that only time could understand. The air was cool, almost damp, and a hint of stone and dust hung in the silence. The narrow corridors led us deeper into the heart of the structure, past huge blocks of stone that were fitted together so precisely that I could hardly believe that human hands had created them. The king's chamber, with its simple but awe-inspiring presence, made me tremble inside. The sharp lines of the granite seemed indestructible, and yet I felt how the millennia had gnawed at them. The queen's chamber, smaller but no less impressive, radiated an inexplicable calm. While the other tourists listened in fascination to our guide's explanations, I became restless. The urge to reach the top of the pyramid grew stronger and stronger. It was as if an invisible force was tugging at my soul and whispering to me that this was my goal, my destiny. When the tour ended and the sun slowly sank below the horizon, I sought out one of the guards. My heart was pounding as I told him my request. With a nervous smile and a subtle tip, I finally managed to convince him. He gave me clear instructions. Be on the south side at 11 p.m., near the second stone block. Wait until I give you a sign. I spent the next few hours in the guard's tent in subdued tension. Darkness settled over the plateau like a heavy veil, and the tourists gradually streamed away. The desert outside became quiet, only occasionally interrupted by the hoarse call of a desert falcon or the gentle rustling of the wind through the sand. At 11 p.m. the time had come. The guard nodded to me and I crept towards the pyramid. Taking the first step onto the stone steps was like a ritual, a mixture of awe and adrenaline, because I knew exactly what was at stake. The climb was physically and emotionally demanding. The 146 meters seemed endless to me, each stone block an obstacle that challenged my concentration and strength. The cool night air made the climb a little more bearable, but the thought of being discovered kept my pulse racing. Without a flashlight, I climbed carefully, feeling my way along the edges and feeling the rough stones under my fingers. The higher I got, the smaller the world below me seemed. The sandy areas of the plateau became an invisible sea, and Cairo spread out like a carpet of glittering lights. The flickering of the city lights, which seemed to merge with the stars in the distance, created a magical atmosphere. The silence of the heights was different from that of the desert. Up here it was absolute, untouched by any civilization save for the muted hum of the city below. The wind was stronger, and its cold fingers tugged at my clothing, almost as if to hold me back. When I finally reached the top, I was exhausted but overwhelmed. I sank beneath the pyramid-shaped wooden structure in the center and took a deep breath. The sandstone beneath me felt cool, almost like an old friend welcoming me. In the moonlight, I could make out the names and initials of previous climbers, carved into the stone. Some were barely legible, blurred by time, but their marks remained, like silent testament to the people who had reached this place before me. I looked down on Cairo. The sky was full of airplanes gliding across the night sky like pearls on a string. The scene was surreal, as if I had left the earth and was now standing between heaven and eternity. Up here, in this sacred place, I felt a strange mixture of peace and unrest. The urge to climb to the top was sated, but new questions crowded into my mind. What had really brought me here? The events that unfolded at the top of the pyramid had already shaken me deeply, but what happened next would change my perception forever. As I stared at the glittering lights of Cairo, I was suddenly filled with an energy unlike anything I had ever felt before. It started with a slight tingle, like static electricity on the skin, but the feeling quickly grew in intensity. My whole body began to flutter and tremble, as if under an invisible, electrifying wave. I felt my muscles tense and relax, completely independent of my will. My heart raced, my breath caught, and then something happened that left me in a state of pure fascination. It felt like I was floating. For a moment, gravity was suspended, my body light as a feather, buoyed by an invisible force. The wind blew stronger, or maybe I was just imagining it, but it felt like the air around me had come alive. I closed my eyes and visions appeared before my eyes, fleeting images that could not be grasped, unknown faces, symbols, lights, as if from another world. This energy was overwhelming, terrifying and yet beautiful at the same time. It penetrated every fiber of my being, as if it wanted to transform me, to renew me from within. And then, as suddenly as it had come, it disappeared. My body calmed down, the fluttering and shaking stopped, and I felt as if I had just lived through an incomprehensible storm. But with this calm came a desire, an inner calling. I had to return to the king's chamber. When the energy had completely subsided, I gathered my thoughts and made the decision to descend from the top of the pyramid. But I knew that the descent would be far more dangerous than the ascent. The steps, which were barely visible in the dark, required my full concentration. The darkness was almost absolute here, on the shadowy side of the pyramid. No moonlight showed me the way, and I had to feel my way carefully. Every move had to be precise. One misstep, and I could fall into the depths. I felt the rough stone under my fingers and feet, heard the soft crunch of sand that gave way under my soles with every step. From time to time I paused to get my bearings, to look into the distance, where the desert lay like an endless black sea. The effort was enormous. My body protested with every step, but I forced myself to continue. The thought of being discovered spurred me on, even though my heart beat faster with every sound that came from the darkness. After what felt like an eternity, I put my last foot on solid ground. The relief was indescribable, and I sank down against the cool stone of the pyramid for a moment to take a deep breath. The two guards were waiting for me below. One of them just nodded at me briefly as he went back to his tent as if nothing had happened. The other, however, led me wordlessly towards the road that would take me back to Cairo. The night in the desert was different from what I expected. It was quiet but not lifeless. The wind rustled softly through the sand dunes, and in the distance I could hear the occasional wail of a jackal. The starry sky above us was clear and infinite, as if time itself stood still for a moment. But then it happened. A faint crackle in the air made me pause. It was like the sound of electrical sparks, but much louder, more powerful. Looking up, I experienced something I never thought possible. A ball of fire streaked across the sky, coming from the direction of the desert, bright and dazzling. It moved majestically, hundreds of meters above the ground, leaving a trail of light that illuminated the darkness. The object seemed to have some kind of engine, but it was not a normal engine. It crackled, as if under strong electrical tension, and 3 beams emanated from it, 1 in bright red, and 2 in intense blue tones. "What is that?" I whispered, my eyes following the fireball. The guard next to me remained quiet, almost indifferent. "That happens here sometimes," he said in a voice that barely echoed in the silent desert. I was sure. This was not ball lightning, not a meteor. It was something else. The fireball broke through the clouds and lit them up from within before slowly disappearing into the distance until it was just a tiny dot on the horizon. The events of the night burned deep into my soul. Everything I had experienced, the energy on the pyramid, the dangerous descent, and now this inexplicable phenomenon in the sky, seemed to be more than just a coincidence. It felt like a message, a sign that I was on the right path. The desert now lay silent before us, but inside me a storm of questions, fascination, and a strange sense of destiny raged. Whatever this path was, I knew I had to continue on it, because somewhere behind all these events a truth was waiting, calling me. The next day the Egyptian sun was relentless as I stepped onto the Giza plateau again. Even from afar the Great Pyramid glittered in the blazing midday heat, as if it wanted to show off its majesty and mystery even more. A tingling sensation ran through me with every step I took towards it. I knew this day would be different. I could feel it. It was early afternoon when I visited the head of the guards. He was sitting in a shady area near the Great Pyramid, a cup of tea in his hand while a fan fought desperately against the heat. In a quiet but firm voice I explained my request to him. "Into the king's chamber alone?" he repeated in disbelief, shaking his head. "That's impossible. Not even we who guard the pyramid every day go in alone, especially not into the king's chamber." I saw his brow furrow deeply. It wasn't just the thought of breaking the rules that worried him. It was a real respect, maybe even fear for this place. He told me about strange noises, about shadows that sometimes flitted through the corridors without any discernible origin, and about the almost tangible heaviness that permeated the chamber. But I didn't let up. With emphasis, but also with awe, I explained to him why it was so important to me. I spoke of inner inspiration, of a calling that I had to follow. Finally, he gave in. "Good," he said reluctantly, pulling a small black scarab from his pocket. "Take this. It's a protective amulet. Many say it protects against evil energies." He also made sure that the large iron doors that close off the entrance to the pyramid were not locked. But be careful, he warned me again urgently, and make sure no one sees you. If something happens, I can't help you. The afternoon sun burned relentlessly, but the plateau was silent. Too hot for tourists, and the few guards were seeking shelter from the heat. It was the perfect moment to get in unnoticed. With my heart pounding, I approached the entrance passage that led into the interior of the pyramid. As I stepped through the entrance, I was immediately hit by the cool, dry air, a sharp contrast to the heat outside. The walls of solid stone seemed to radiate the millennia they had endured. The path to the king's chamber was familiar to me from the previous tour. I followed the narrow corridors and felt increasingly cut off from the outside world. The darkness was almost oppressive, only occasionally broken by small rays of light falling through old ventilation shafts. Each of my steps echoed in the silent, endless corridors, and I could hear my own heartbeat, which became faster the closer I got to the chamber. Then I stood before it. The king's chamber. The room opened up before me, simple yet sublime. The walls were smooth and bare, but the atmosphere was overwhelming. It was as if the room had a presence of its own, a power that embedded itself in the silence. In the center sat the large sarcophagus made of dark granite, empty and yet so impressive that it was hard to look away. A shiver ran down my spine. I didn't know why, but I felt magically drawn to this sarcophagus. It was as if a strange voice was whispering in my head, inviting me to go inside. Without thinking twice, perhaps because I knew I wouldn't have the courage otherwise, I slowly approached the sarcophagus. The smooth surface felt cooler than I expected. My heart pounded in my chest as I carefully stepped inside and lay down. The cold stone enclosed my body, and for a moment I felt as if I had broken through time. The weight of the history that lay within these walls was almost tangible. But after the first few seconds of tension, an unexpected calm set in. My breathing became even. My thoughts cleared. There was something comforting, almost sacred about the silence of the chamber. It was as if I was being connected to the past, to an energy that was older than any human memory. I felt myself becoming one with this place, my spirit penetrating the walls and flowing out into the darkness far beyond the boundaries of the pyramid. The minutes passed as if in a trance. Everything inside me became quiet, and a deep peace filled me. I knew that I was in a sacred place, a place where the veils between the worlds were lifted. But somewhere in this silence there was also a whisper, quiet and barely perceptible. It spoke not in words but in feelings, in images that only slowly formed in my mind. What I experienced in that king's chamber defies any logical explanation. It is difficult to put it into words, but I will do my best to share this moment with you, dear listener. No sooner had I sunk into a deep calm in the sarcophagus than the atmosphere in the room suddenly changed. The silence that had previously been soothing suddenly became heavy, oppressive, almost alive. It was as if the air itself became thicker, as if it took on a form that I could not see. A shiver ran through me and I felt clearly. I was no longer alone. If you have ever had the feeling of being watched, multiply that feeling by 1,000. It was as if an invisible presence was standing right next to me, looking at me piercingly, illuminating every fiber of my being. And yet there was no shadow, no sound, just this all-encompassing feeling. My breathing quickened and my hands trembled slightly, but I knew I must not show fear now. Then something happened that transcended all my previous notions of reality. It wasn't a voice I heard. It wasn't a physical signal. It was as if my thoughts themselves suddenly received an answer before I could fully think it through. It was a dialogue without words, a connection that existed beyond language. I thought, "Who are you? What do you want from me?" and immediately I felt an answer, clear and distinct, right in my mind, as if it had always been there. I am a being of light, born from the energy of your galaxy. It was as if I were part of a multi-dimensional cinematic performance, but I was not just a spectator. I was in the middle of the action. The chamber seemed to change. The space around me suddenly became limitless, like a cosmic window opening before me. I saw stars, galaxies, a black hole that towered over everything with its sheer size. The being explained to me that it had no form, no body, no matter. It was pure energy, an essence that existed in our Milky Way, near a massive black hole. This hole, it explained to me, was not an end but a transition. It drew in energy, condensed it, and then released it again. An eternal breath of the universe, inhaling and exhaling on a cosmic scale. I am part of this cycle, the being told me. Not a god as your religions worship, but a creation of forces far beyond your comprehension. The words, or rather the thoughts it conveyed to me, were so powerful that I had trouble comprehending them. But that was not all. It explained to me why I was here, why I felt this place calling to me. This is not your first time here, it told me. Your spirit has walked this earth many times, in different bodies, at different times. You are a traveler, a seeker. Each of your lives has had a destiny, a purpose. The words struck me like a bolt of lightning. I did not know how to react. Was it possible that I had actually lived before? That I was always being reborn to fulfill some kind of higher purpose? Your journey is not over yet, the being continued. You are here to discover who you really are and what your place is in the fabric of this universe. The being made it clear to me that it was only allowed to show me a tiny fraction of the truth, just enough to understand my next step, but not so much that it overwhelmed my human imagination. That which you call creator, it explained, is a force that permeates everything. Thoughts create worlds. The creator of this universe shapes everything from pure imagination, but you too carry a spark of that creative power within you. When the being revealed to me who I had once been, it felt like a door had been opened that had remained firmly closed for all these millennia. Baal. That was what I had once been called. That name resonated in my mind like an echo that penetrated ever deeper into my core. The being explained to me that I had once come from a planet in a binary star system, about 7,000 light-years from Earth. The idea alone made my mind reel. Another planet, so far away, and yet a place connected to me. I had been manifested there, it said, an existence made of energy that had found its way here 12,500 years ago. Back then, I was Baal. The name felt familiar, and yet there was a strange heaviness to it. I asked, why did I come here then? The answer came immediately. You were a pioneer, a trailblazer. Your task was to build a bridge between the worlds. You worked on Earth, brought knowledge to people, taught them to understand the forces of the universe. But time has changed many things. Your name remains, but its meaning has been distorted, your story hidden in myths and legends. I straightened up inwardly and asked further, and the pyramids? What is their true meaning? The being showed me a vision. It was as if the walls of the king's chamber were dissolving and I was looking into the past. The desert stretched out before me, not barren and dry as it is today, but alive. Lush vegetation lined the banks of a mighty river, and where Cairo now stood, enormous buildings rose that seemed to pulsate with energy. The Great Pyramid of Cheops was the first of its kind, the being explained. A transmitter, created to channel energy. It did not serve as a tomb, That is a mistake of humanity. The pharaohs of old used this energy to dematerialize themselves, to travel from Earth to their planet, and return again. I felt my heart beating faster. The thought that these ancient buildings were not just piles of stones, but machines, fascinated me. The so-called new pharaohs did not understand many things. They believed they could copy the knowledge of the ancients, but they failed. Their replicas are nothing but shadows of the original pyramid. The true knowledge was lost with the ancients when they left the earth. The being went on to explain that even the construction of the pyramid was misunderstood. Anti-gravity technology and precise tools that would go beyond today's understanding had been used. The image of people pulling stones weighing tons over ramps was nothing but a naive idea. But something in the being's words made me pause. If the pyramid was a transmitter, why doesn't it work today? It almost seemed as if the being was sighing, even though it had no physical breath. The energy sources have dried up. Humanity has lost the knowledge necessary to reactivate them. But even if it were to rediscover it, the pyramids are damaged, their resonance no longer complete. I thought of the countless tourists who, like me, entered the king's chamber, of the scientists who sought explanations and asked, "Why are you telling me all this? What can I do with it?" "You are ready to understand," the being replied. "Most people are not. Their perception is limited by what they can see and touch. But you feel the truth behind things. You were Baal, and the legacy of your previous existence is within you. I give you this information because you can not only absorb it but understand it." A sudden warmth flooded through me. It was not physical heat, but the feeling that something was coming to life inside me, something ancient that I could not name. "What I am showing you is only a fraction of the truth," said the being. "You cannot yet grasp more than that. But you will remember. Step by step the puzzle will come together. And someday you will understand why you are here now, at this time." The vision faded and I found myself back in the king's chamber, alone with my thoughts. But the chamber no longer felt empty. It was as if the walls themselves bore the memory of the conversation, as if they were alive. I looked up at the massive stones, at the walls that were so much more than just cold blocks of granite. They were a testimony to a time long past, a silent guardian of the truth revealed to only a few. I took a deep breath. The being's insights had shaken me to the core, but at the same time I felt an indescribable clarity. The pyramid was a relic of an era that humanity had forgotten, and yet a part of my own history. As I continued to lie in the cold sarcophagus, the being's thoughts echoing in my mind, something extraordinary began to happen. It was as if the boundaries of my body dissolved. My perception expanded, and suddenly I was no longer just in the king's chamber. I was everywhere. The being led me through the infinite expanse of the Milky Way. I saw colors and lights that no words can describe. Stars pulsed like heartbeats, planets rotated in a gentle symphony, and energies like streams of a vast ocean flowed through the void. It was overwhelming, almost too much for my mind, but at the same time I felt a deep calm, as if this was my true place in the universe. In a vision, it showed me how the pyramids were built. I saw beings not of this earth, tall and elegant with glowing eyes and an aura of energy. They moved huge blocks of stone, not with muscles, but with a knowledge of the forces of gravity and resonance. The pyramids were built to perfection, each point aligned with the stars to focus and channel the energies of the universe. Then it showed me planets that were once inhabited. Mars, with its red deserts, was once green and full of life. I saw huge cities glittering in the oceans and beings that looked similar to us humans, but larger and more advanced. Jupiter, so massive, once had moons that were inhabited, little paradises in the shadow of the giant. But I also saw destruction. Planets devastated by wars and civilizations that had retreated deep beneath the surface to survive. The being revealed to me that our Earth also holds such secrets. Beneath the crust of our planet exist humanoid beings that have lived in hiding for millennia, isolated from humanity to protect themselves from the dangers on the surface. There is so much life in this galaxy, I thought, and yet humanity believes it is alone. The being made me understand that our own civilization is at a turning point. The path we are taking is leading us into the abyss, it told me. But there is hope. A time will come when these other beings will return to help us, or to judge us if we do not change. Suddenly I felt the connection weaken. The being's presence, which had enveloped me like a warm, all-encompassing blanket, began to fade. But I felt it pull away from me, gently but firmly. One last thought echoed in my mind. Everything has its time. You will understand when the moment comes. Suddenly it was quiet. The king's chamber was dark and cold again, and I lay alone in the sarcophagus. I slowly opened my eyes and looked at the ceiling. The silence was deafening, but I felt an indescribable relief inside me. I sat up, my legs feeling shaky, as if I had just stepped onto solid ground after a long journey. A deep breath filled my lungs, and I felt an incredible joy mixed with humility. I slowly climbed out of the sarcophagus and began the walk back through the great gallery. The massive stone walls seemed different now, no longer oppressive, but alive, as if they were witnesses to what I had experienced. Every step was careful, almost reverent. When I finally stepped outside, the hot air of the Egyptian desert hit me. The guard who had left the door open for me waited in the distance. His face was serious, but I could see a hint of curiosity as I approached him. I thanked him quietly, knowing he could never guess what I had just experienced. The world felt different, more alive, full of mysteries that I could now understand, at least a small part of them. I looked back at the pyramid once more, its tip sparkling in the light of the afternoon sun. In my heart I knew that this was only the beginning. A path had been opened for me, and nothing would ever be the same again. Dear listeners, this was the end of my journey. At least this journey that took me to places full of mystery, history, and unimaginable insights. Everything I have experienced has changed me, broadened my perspective, and filled me with knowledge that I can hardly comprehend myself. But what I know for sure is that this journey was not just a journey through distant lands and pyramids, but also a journey into my inner self. Perhaps I think there is such a journey for each of us. And perhaps the goal is not to understand everything, but to simply get involved. For me, much remains a mystery, and that is precisely where the beauty lies. I would like to share something important with you. I was born in 1949 and have been walking this earth ever since. Through the being I met, I learned that I am nothing more and nothing less than a kind of sensor, an instrument for these beings who are not gods, but who are nevertheless above us humans. To put it simply, I serve them like a camera and a microphone at the same time. Everything I experience, everything I feel, and everything that is still to come is known to them. My so-called brothers in spirit always know about me and my journey. It may be difficult to understand, but it is the truth as it was revealed to me. If you want to find out more, you can simply contact me, and I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you for following me through this audiobook. May my story give you new thoughts, perspectives, and perhaps a bit of hope. Your devoted Baal, the Lightbringer.